Hi there, and welcome to Fantasy for the Ages, the show where a father and son, and sometimes some other people, sit down and talk about a subgenre of fantasy. I'm the son in that equation, Zach.
And that makes me the father, Jim. Welcome to our podcast episode here, a midweek special we're bringing to you today. Before we talk about any of that stuff, usual routine, Zach, how are you doing today?
I am hot. It's been in the hundreds, and currently, as we're sitting here, I am...
And we don't do that.
No, Pacific Northwest doesn't like 100-degree weather, but I'll take it. I am enjoying it for the most part.
It's 109 today right now.
I'm going to feel that later on because as you're downstairs where we normally record, I went upstairs to where I usually play D&D, or at least until I move, and it doesn't get as cold up here. So I'll probably be about 20 to 30 degrees hotter than you are for most of the day. But that's how I'm doing. How are you doing, Dad?
Well, I'm clearly more comfortable than you. Absolutely. I've got an air conditioning vent blowing right on my feet and my toes are cold. So yeah, I'm doing good. Life is good. It's a nice weekend and another good opportunity to be able to just kick back and talk some fantasy with you. So looking forward to that. The other thing I always want to know, of course, what are you drinking, Zach?
I went with a classic, just a nice rum and Coke, but I think you went a little more interesting.
I did. I have... Well, I was intentional. We're talking about something kind of dark today.
Okay.
So I got a drink called A Little Piece of Heaven. Something to counteract it. So it's a nice light beverage. The recipe is on our Instagram, as always, but a lot of fruit juice, a little Malibu rum, and some peach schnapps. So just fun and light.
All
good
around
stuff.
Tasty.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Well, with that out of the way, today we're here to talk about something we have not talked about before on the podcast, Grimdark. The Grimdark fantasy subgenre. I'm super pumped to introduce guests that we have with us for this episode. People I consider far more competent and experienced. Their heads are going to swell as I talk right now. With this particular
Mine will,
type.
but Charles will stay grounded.
Yeah. I mean, this fiction isn't something we've gotten into nearly as much as these gentlemen have. So they're going to elevate our discussion today. And I want to introduce to you, our most excellent listeners, Charles and Dylan, the co-hosts of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. Welcome, guys.
Yes, thank you so much. Jim, Zach, thank you so much for having us on. We're super excited. My name's Charles here, and I'll let Dylan chime in so you can identify his voice a little bit.
I sound like this.
There you go. And we are the friends of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. Dylan and I have been friends for a very long time. Oh gosh, over 20 years now. We grew up together and all that.
For Charles.
Yeah, and about a year ago, it's been a pleasure, Dylan. It's been a pleasure. And about a year ago, we started a podcast where we talk fantasy, much like Jim and Zach here. And yep, we do 3 episodes a week over there. We're talking through Joe Abercrombie right now, and then we've got all kinds of other books along the way. But what we're hoping is that we can kind of tempt you to the dark side a little bit more with this with this Grimdark conversation.
Absolutely. I love their podcast. So listeners, if you like ours, you'd like theirs too. They're quirky. They're different from us, but they're very entertaining as well. They keep it light. They keep it fun, even when they talk dark stuff.
They've known each other about as long as my dad and I have, but they actually chose to be friends. I just was born into this.
You're stuck with him.
Yeah, he didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
You didn't choose to be here.
When we create differences, we just shut off the Zoom call and go on to our lives. You guys have to have the dinner table and family gatherings and all these other things.
That's right. So we better keep this working. Okay, if this disintegrates, we have a problem. Yeah.
Well, don't worry. I tried to be in Charles's family for most of our childhood, going over every weekend for dinners, and so I like to think of myself as a member of Charles's family, whether he likes to believe it or not.
Now, I mentioned I have been listening to your podcast, Dylan. I feel like I should apologize. I've got no music that you could ask me to turn up in your headphones. Sorry, we put that in post. So
I'll just take your voice turned up in my headphones. But Charles doesn't have control of this, so I feel all over the place when Charles isn't keeping us under control. But Jim, you have a nice grounded presence too, so I can see you're going to keep us on track.
There we go.
And turn up in my headphones, just your voices, your wonderful voices.
I started your podcast at the very beginning, so I've been working my way through, and there's a ton of content on all sorts of podcasts, so I'm about 5 months behind, but that means I did just listen to your episode on the Blade itself. And, I've seen you move into Joe Abercrombie. You'd been talking about him forever, but you finally started, working through it now. And good stuff. I'm excited to hear what you can bring to what we have to talk about today.
We will, for sure.
Yeah,
that's one of our favorites. Sorry. Yeah, go.
So, fans, again, if you like our podcast, again, you're gonna love these guys. I will put a link to where you can find them, where you can find their podcast in our show notes. Definitely go check them out. They're awesome.
Well, thank you.
But let's get into some content now.
Let's do it.
Let's talk Grimdark. I mean, what is it? As our listeners know, I'm a note taker, so I do try to be prepared for episodes, and I did a little research into Grimdark because I've read some. Zach has read some.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about what we've actually read, what our personal experience is coming up here. But I just want to touch on a definition and see if we can kind of figure out, okay, how do you define Grimdark? So I, looked around the great world of the internet and all the wisdom that's out there.
Everything on there, 100% true.
Yeah, not just Wikipedia. I went beyond, okay?
Wow.
And I found
beyond Wikipedia.
Yeah,
I didn't know there's anything beyond Wikipedia. You've got to show me these other websites after this.
It's the Grimdark web.
Yeah, Jim. Show me these other websites.
Man, I should have been in the dark web because it's grimdark,
the Grimdark web.
Mm-hmm. So I've got five quotes here for us of possible definitions.
Okay.
I want you to just listen to these, and then everybody respond. What are your reactions to what these are saying? So first one, and I'll give all 5 before we talk about them. Speculative fiction with a tone, style, or setting that is particularly dystopian, amoral, or violent. Second one, fiction where nobody is honorable and might is right. Third one, an anti-Tolkien approach to fantasy writing. We're going to talk about that one some more.
We take these one by one after you're done, Jim. I think that'll be fun. Yeah,
I put them in order that I'm building to my favorite. So,
okay, got it.
So here's the next one: gritty, depressing books you just can't seem to put down. And finally, when I read this, I started laughing. Grimdark fiction is the result of a writer who has taken love and compassion behind the shed and shot them between the eyes.
Oh.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, okay,
What do you think, guys? React.
Dylan?
Okay. Yeah, well, I do kind of want to offer, there's Mark Lawrence definition of Grimdark that, Mark Lawrence, author.
He's not my TBR.
Yes. And he does, I kind of want to react to each of the individual, like if you went down the list, like said one definition, because I think I have thoughts on all of them.
Oh yeah, I have opinions.
But if I can add one to the mix and then we can take them each one by one, that would be my favorite way to go to it. So Mark Lawrence has this incredible list of rankings that he had people vote for on his blog of what are the most grimdark books. And he almost tried to work backward toward defining it by seeing what is conceived as the most grimdark and was conceived as the least grimdark of the books that he put out there. And he starts his blog post, and I can send this link over to you, Jim, if you want to put in the show notes.
That'd be great, sure.
And he says, the process of defining grimdark to be not a war of words, but a war for a word. There are those who use grimdark as a pejorative for a vague group of things they dislike. There are grimdark aficionados who see the term as descriptor for an aesthetic that requires the presence of a number of distinct elements, which may include moral grayness, bleakness, and nihilism. And there are some, an apparent majority who just see it as the setting on a control knob relating to general levels of violence and ickiness. Here, all are free to battle it out and define this word through usage and example. Let your voice be heard, says Mark Lawrence, international best-selling author, and and wonderful man. So I think, yeah. So I've always thought of it kind of through this lens of the word is super nebulous. Mm-hmm. It's a word that people throw around mostly to describe, I think, books that almost like what Mark Lawrence was saying there, like books that make them kind of feel bad, but they also think are good. Mm-hmm. And I know that was kind of like the fourth or third definition that you read there, Jim. Yep. It's like, okay, like they make me feel awful, but why do I keep reading?
Can't stop. I can't stop.
Yes. Yeah. So, but yes, I think the word, the word has been given to the community without a clear definition. And that's why like an episode like this, where we kind of just toss around our ideas of how we think about it, is such a fun idea because, I mean, there is no right answer here. There's just what do we perceive?
Right. Zach, I see something on your mind. Go ahead.
Yeah, earlier this week, I threw that question out to our Twitter because I was sitting here going, okay, Grimdark. What the hell actually is Grimdark? I don't have that firm description, and I think it's fair to say it doesn't necessarily exist, and that's okay, but we can still talk about it and try and figure that out.
That's where the fun is.
Yeah, it definitely feels like you know it when you're reading it. Like I can't define it, but I know what it is when I'm reading it, and it's definitely got this tone and style to it. I love that line you dropped there, Jim, about it being anti-Tolkien. I think that's great because it's kind of like I feel like it probably came as a response to someone who's like, I'm just trying to write a fantasy world that's not all hugs and good feelings and good versus evil. I wanted to make it a bit more gritty and occasionally depressing, occasionally violent. And I think books that walk this wide spectrum that is Grimdark.
And do you think that's where this really was born? Was it a reaction to the Tolkien-esque fantasy where the heroes are truly noble and the bad guys, everyone knew they were bad and they were bad to the core? And it wasn't realistic enough? Do you think that's where this came from?
We do have to be realistic about these things, Jim, as Lord Grimdark, Joe Abercrombie might say. And
we're going to say one thing. We're going to have to be realistic.
Say one thing for what we're going to do on this episode. We're going to be realistic about Grimdark. And here's what. Please don't quote me on this, listeners. This is the vague memory of Dylan, like spending late nights trying to figure out where Grimdark came from. And if I remember correctly, it comes from Warhammer.
There's a quote.
It does. Like, Warhammer 40,000, something like that.
Yeah, 40K. Yeah. The game. And I don't know a lot about that, but I've never played it or anything like that. But I'd heard that's where it came from. And then Joe Abercrombie, who's at Lord Grimdark on Twitter, and we were just talking about that at the Blade Itself episode earlier. It's like, so the Blade Itself is by Joe Abercrombie, and he's the one who I think really brought the term into the genre of fantasy, and he did it as a joke. He was doing it as this kind of like, oh yeah, I'm such a bad, twisted, cynical dude. Like, I'm Lord Grimdark. And he's got, you put your little location on Twitter and his thing says like, in a dark, jaded literary sewer or something like that. So Joe Abercrombie, you're reading, it sounds like now, Jim. So this is not a just horribly dark, cynical person with no sense of like morality or anything like that. It's a person who's really, really funny. Really, and you read his book and it comes through even when it's ridiculously dark. He's so funny. And Grimdark was a kind of a joke that took on a life of its own in some ways for Abercrombie because he was Lord Grimdark, and then people do get that sensation of almost that anti-Tolkien type stance from reading his books because there's so much subversion of all these Tolkien things like Charles was saying. And it's so interesting to see then pretty much a whole subgenre adopted this idea of Grimdark and said, like, this is where fantasy must be going because everyone's loving the stuff that this Joe Abercrombie guy is doing. He's doing it so differently.
Right.
So I think, like, if we talk origin, like in a lot of ways, I don't think Abercrombie, from what I've seen him talk about, I don't think he intentionally seeks to be anti-Tolkien, but he was raised on Tolkien in terms of his fantasy influence, and he was sitting there being Joe Abercrombie. This is nebulous still in memory of interviews and stuff, sitting there thinking, hey, like that's not how this would happen in the real world. Being noble all the time sometimes leads to you getting bad things happen. We like to say on the podcast sometimes, in Grimdark, no good deed goes unpunished. And what we see a lot of in the Grimdark subgenre is that sort of mentality. And in a lot of ways, I do think it is a reaction, like you're saying, Jim, like is a reaction to Tolkien, but it's like all of fantasy is a reaction to Tolkien, like modern fantasy. All of it is a reaction to Tolkien, kind of. So Grimdark is just like, let's shift it all the way around, turn this 180.
And that's where I think we kind of had to explore there. There was so much that followed in a pattern of Tolkien, and you can look at a lot of high fantasy where it's very similar. Yeah, different nuances to the plot, but very similar. Zach and I, we should spend some time in one of our episodes just kind of putting all the clones side by side, because you can, this character is actually Gandalf. This character is actually Frodo, and you can do that with so many of them. Grimdark was like, we're going to try to do something completely different. And I think that's what we've seen out there now. The key, though, is I got to wonder, and I'd love to hear, Charles, Zach, what you think on this one particular piece. People go to fiction often to escape. It's something fun, stress-free. They get away from the real world for a while. Grimdark doesn't let them exactly maybe get away from the real world in the same way, because it's more real world. There's more grit and dark. So why would people want to read this stuff? So that's what I throw at you there. I mean, I love the stuff already, but why should people?
My short answer, to the best of my understanding, just because it is different and maybe shares some of that dark similarities to reality, doesn't make it actually realistic. Escapism doesn't have to be escape to something purely good. And it's where I think I talked with you in a previous episode about how something I really love about fantasy as a genre is that you can dive in and in a relatively safe space explore really unsafe topics and really get into that process and even help people in a very therapeutic way. It's not therapy, but it can be therapeutic. And I think Grimdark serves as some of that. You see a lot of parts that are uncomfortable in society, but done in a way that is still fantastical enough that you get that escapism.
Yeah, that's true. I would also say, everyone commonly says fantasy is escapism, and I believe that to be true. But I also think there is another reason that we read fantasy where it's not necessarily escapism, but it helps us learn how to cope with the world that we're in. So it's not essentially getting lost in another world, it's processing the one that we're experiencing. And I think Abercrombie specifically, and you can go into other authors too, are processing their experiences of reading something like Lord of the Rings, or maybe their experiences in the real world, and are trying to tell a new story in a new voice in a way that brings more reality into the fantasy world. I think there's a lot of readers, at least in this modern age, that are interested in the intrigue and the dubiousness, and sometimes just like, oh, that would never happen in the real world. You kind of lose some of that in Grimdark when you have this moral ambiguity. And also, I might be a minority here, but I think violence can be very fun. Like a Tarantino movie where there's all kinds of gratuitous violence and gore and stuff. Sometimes that stuff is just entertaining. I don't know. I enjoy it. So those are two reasons right there.
I don't understand this. We never watch anything gratuitous, do we? Yeah. What? Nobody does
you
that.
You definitely need to understand what you're getting into. You're not going to want to pick up something gratuitous and violence unaware. But if you know you're going into it, it can be amazing.
Yeah. No, you make great points there. And I think Grimdark, it's not going to be for everybody. We've had some discussions on our Discord server about this, and some of the people who are with us, they like the lighter stuff. you know, and they don't want to go into dark places, and there's reasons. I mean, there's some real trigger opportunities in Grimdark. If people have brought things from their real life experiences with them that they're going to connect with, they want to stay away.
Yeah.
That's probably not going to be healthy for them.
Definitely. Yeah, one of the book, like we did a Twitter, like we usually call out for book recommendations, and we called out to Twitter for recommendations for Grimdark books. And one of the ones that got mentioned a lot was Mark Lawrence's Prince of Thorns from the Broken Empire trilogy. And we love that series, and I would recommend it too, but I always drop the caveat. Look, there's sexual assault, there's gratuitous violence. Like, if that's not for you, don't read it, because this stuff happens in the first chapter. So I definitely agree, when you're recommending certain books to people, it's important to have those qualifiers of like, not everyone wants to read a book where horrible things happen to good people. You know, it's just like, that's not what someone wants to pick up a book for.
Right.
So I think recommending with a warning is warranted sometimes, for sure.
I will say one thing I have enjoyed is that it's very rare that any of these topics are broached in a sense that glorifies them. They're used for entertainment value, but they're not put up on this pedestal of this is a good thing, usually. Rather, they're used as a device to tell this story and go, this is a bad thing, and I'm showing it to you on purpose.
Yeah, or like the character thinks it's a good thing, but the character is bad, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me segue this into the next part of our conversation then. You know, at this point, I'm definitely a fan of Grimdark. I started into the genre with Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, plowed through that before HBO came out with its Game of Thrones. Those of you who didn't know that, Game of Thrones was based on books. Okay. All right. So definitely enjoyed that. And after Zach and I started podcasting together, and I started digging into, we both did, into more of the modern fantasy, I then discovered, Grimdark is a thing. I hadn't heard the term before. And discovered all the stuff that's out there and listened to other podcasts like yours, others. I heard about Joe Abercrombie. So yeah, I got into the First Law trilogy, read those. I haven't read the rest of the books yet, but they're on my TBR. I'll get to them. I also have a whole bunch of other authors now in my TBR. Stephen Erickson, Mark Lawrence, Matthew Stover, R.F. Kwong. You know, there's so many more that I could add in there too. And I'm going to give you guys a chance later on to tell us some more we should put in there. But
you're going to hear a lot about R.F. Kwong.
I've already got nearly 200 books on a literal spreadsheet of books I plan to read. It's crazy. But when we look at all the different authors and all their different takes on Grimdark, is there a point where they're taking it is too much? Where they're going too dark? I know literature is subjective, very much so, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, all of you here. Can authors push the envelope too far? What do you think?
I think that there's too far for each individual reader.
Yes.
Right? Like, there's some point that feels too far for me. I don't think I've hit it yet, but I keep trying.
Right.
So I think that being said, I'm sure y'all have a ton of Wheel of Time fans, and that's a big portion of your Discord and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And if what they're looking for in fantasy is what the kind of experience that Robert Jordan is providing, which is one of like oftentimes reluctant and oftentimes like underdog heroes strive and succeed over these odds that are insurmountable, then they might need some more steps to work their way up toward like the highest end. They might read the first chapter, like Charles was saying, of Prince of Thorns and be like, whoa, that's a lot. That being said, I'm kind of the opinion that artists ought to be allowed to write whatever they want to write, and then the world can react to it in the way the world wants to react to it. And each individual reader will react to it and say, whoa, this one was too far for me. And that's kind of how I see the too far question.
All right.
Yeah.
Charles?
I would agree with Dylan's sentiment. For me, I've understood after a while of recommending books to people that my kind of tolerance for a lot of these, what we are calling grim, dark scenarios, like especially violence and things like that, is higher than some people. So I'm always trying to be more conscious, like, hey, I loved this, but you might not, so like being more aware of that. I think that just speaks to how wide of a spectrum it is. And for me, when I'm reading some of the more I guess, brutal scenes or some of the more uncomfortable scenes in something like Game of Thrones or in Mark Lawrence's work or Judd Abercrombie's work, it's always done really thoughtfully. All those guys are really tremendous authors, and whether it's just to be entertaining or whether it's to invoke an emotion in the scene, it's always done really well. I'm sure there's tons of edgy wannabe authors writing hateful stuff that we'll never read, but for like all the masters that are out there writing grimdark, it's always done with a purpose. And like Dylan said, I've yet to find my threshold for tolerance for it. So maybe I'm a little twisted myself, but I don't know. I enjoy it. So.
See, Zach, you haven't chimed in yet. Before you do, though, just tying into what Charles said there exactly, the masters that we recognize probably haven't gone too far yet. Right. But I bet there are some trashy ones out there that's like, really, guys? Because, I connect it to the horror movie industry, where a new thing comes out that's classic, like Saw. Saw was a classic movie, but man, the people who went into that kind of genre then just took it further and further, and finally you can't go watch it without throwing up. It's so bad,
Yeah.
Even the good splatter films from, Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, and wow, you go far enough now, you can find so much junk out there that's not worth the 2 hours, hour and a half you put into it. You wish you could have it back, Right. Grimdark probably has some people doing the same thing, where they're not as skilled with it. They're just putting a lot of violence, a lot of sexual violence, a lot of amoral behavior because that's grimdark, it'll sell.
Yeah.
But you probably aren't going to spend any time talking about those authors because they're junk and we don't want to listen to that.
Well said, Jim.
Well said.
Zach, your thoughts?
I think my biggest concern on does it go too far and when does it go too far has less to do with authorial intent and more to do with reader reaction. Because that line to me is more, we have to be aware that we want to be using grimdark to bring things to light, process through things, escape or confront all the good things that we've talked about, but at the same time not desensitize ourselves to these things to the point where we go, oh yeah, that's okay. That's how it is. And I think in any form of media, that becomes an inherent risk. And it's not like I'm not sitting here as the Karen saying, don't let your kids read grimdark ever because they will become horrible. But
although I'm guessing there's not a lot of grimdark sitting in school libraries. I'm just guessing that.
I did hear about, I think it was Prince of Thorns being read in a school.
Wow.
By Mark
How
Lawrence,
young.
so.
Yikes.
Yeah. Charles, didn't I share that with you? And you were like, I think I'd sooner go with Red Sister or something, which is another Mark Lawrence.
I would definitely go with Red Sister before Prince of Thorns. Prince of Thorns, like, it starts off pretty hardcore.
Yeah. It wouldn't be my recommendation for children by any means. It's just complicated. And I really appreciate what both of y'all are saying, Jim and Zach, about the idea of thinking about, is it in good, that is kind of what I was taken from you, Jim, is like, is it in good taste? Are you just doing sexual violence for sexual violence's sake, which we're not reading those because Charles and I are like going down like, what are the best books? Like, I'm reading those and then we're like, it's so well done, you can't go too far. But meanwhile, yes, if we tried some of this worse stuff, maybe like, or not worse, but stuff that isn't being received as well, then we'd be like, oh, this is why this isn't being received well. This is too much. And then, thinking about intention versus impact is what I was taking from you, Zach. Is this like, okay, well, you might intend to write a great grimdark story that tells the reality of blah, blah, blah. But that being said, what are you doing to the people that are actually taking this information in? And that's super important to consider. And taking both those together is I'm thinking a lot about it. Thanks for that, guys.
I know both of you guys are a big fan of Game of Thrones. On HBO. I mean,
true.
Setting aside
even the
8.
last season,
we all have our issues with season 8. We get that. But it gives a good example of how in some elements you can take something too far for the wrong reasons, because A Song of Ice and Fire, that's where it's really good. And in the early seasons where they stuck closer to, they had the material, that is where it's strongest. Then when they had to start making it up on their own, but even when they were working their way through the early seasons, they were adding stuff that was gratuitous.
There were points where producers were deciding to throw things in.
It was more than what the books had because they wanted to sell it. They were making a splash, and that was so new to be on TV that it was a cultural phenomenon. Yeah,
Yeah, sometimes I wonder about Game of Thrones. It's like, would it have been as successful in those first 2 seasons if it didn't have the gratuitous violence and nudity in it that we've expected from HBO series in the past? I think people were somehow like morbidly intrigued by how risque that show got. And then when they sat down and were actually watching it, they're like, wow, there's actually a lot here that I really love. And they actually kind of pulled back on it for a while as they got in those later seasons and it really took off. So I think there's this awesome interview with Quentin Tarantino, who directs really violent movies. And he's got like a Karen, I'm going to say, on the other end of this news thing. And she's screaming. She's like, why are your movies so violent? How could you make such violence in your films? And she just keeps going and going. And he just screams over her, because it's fun, Janet, at like as loud as he could. And I was like, it's so true. And sometimes it's just fun if it's done tastefully. And I think Game of Thrones was very successful in walking that line. Yes, sometimes you watch it, you're like, oh, okay. Like, what is it? Sex position? Like, kind of like did that.
Yes. How many scenes can be done in a whorehouse?
Right. Well, yeah, that's the thing, right? Exposition, explaining stuff, or sex position. It's like, and that's one word, not two. SEXPOSITION. That is this thing that they do where they'd keep people entertained by showing nudity while the characters were like explaining the like houses and their different words and their histories, and like people were taking in that information, but they were also having the things that they expect out of an HBO show. So it was an interesting balance, and it did always, sometimes it felt a little, I guess, gratuitous, but it was like, I see why you're doing it and it's working. So
the results.
Yeah.
Years ago when Zach and I were watching Game of Thrones early seasons, those scenes, I'd be covering his eyes. Well, hear it still, but you're too young, son. You can't see this stuff.
Zach was peeking through.
Oh gosh, yeah. I don't think I watched Game of Thrones with my father, so I was probably saved from those moments.
I think Game of Thrones was the one where you didn't do that, but you made me wait.
Zach's mom was cool. She let it happen.
Awesome.
So two cool parents definitely explains how Zach ended up so cool. So it's now it's all coming together over here.
All right, so we agreed Game of Thrones. It did do some really good things for the genre. We actually have a whole episode just talking about, is it okay? The things that
we loved, things we hated.
Oh, Game of Thrones, basically. There are reasons to both love it and reasons that you can hate it in some ways. It has some reasons we've been critical. Episode 8, season 8 again, But overall, we owe it a debt because it gave a jump start to fantasy fiction in the mainstream.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. The amount it was able to do is incredible. I mean, 14 million live viewers towards the end there. It's like unprecedented smash hit, and the amount of interest it drew to the fantasy genre and the amount of television and books and all kinds of things that we've been able to experience since then have been huge. Yeah, we've had to process this too, and we've had this conversation as well in the past year, and I think we're learning to love the show, warts and all, because it's like, man, you go back to some of those iconic moments. It's the reason we have a podcast. That's what we say multiple times on our shows. Like, without Game of Thrones, there'd be no Friends Talking Fantasy easily. So you gotta give it some respect there.
We all agree. We do basically love it. And honestly, you guys know we're big Wheel of Time fans.
Yes.
And that's coming out mainstream, Amazon Prime Video. It's going to be excellent. They've poured a ton of money into it. That would not have happened without Game of Thrones. It showed there was big money in television, long serials of these kinds of epic fantasy series.
Now, I don't think that show will be either grim nor dark. But it still will be very entertaining, and this is why we get it.
Yep. And personally, I'm hoping after it's been out for a couple seasons, people are like, Game of Thrones? What was that? No, I don't remember that show anymore.
Ah.
It's so good.
I'm hoping there's going to be a Game of Thrones renaissance. I might be overly optimistic here, but Charles and I have trying to do our part to be like, hey, can we look back and let's think about the good times?
Yeah, I think
I
think it's coming. I kind of use like Star Wars as a similar metric. It's like those movies came out, the prequel ones I'm referring to, and they weren't well loved, and now people just think they're the greatest things ever. They lived like a second life. I think that's coming for Game of Thrones. I think we're still processing it, but I'm saying it here on Fantasy for the Ages, Game of Thrones. People are going to learn to love it again. It's going to come back.
There you go. Now, I got a segue. This has nothing to do with Grimdark. Are you a believer in the Jar Jar Binks theory?
Oh, absolutely.
We've talked about it.
I love it. I wish that had not been tanked.
Darth Jar Jar is real.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I think it's a fun thought exercise. It's what Taylor Swift would call pretty to think. Like it's fun. It's fun to think about it. That Charles is already like, get me out of here.
I'm leaning back in my chair.
He's as far away from his microphone as he can get, and he's like, "We're on a fantasy podcast. Don't talk about Taylor Swift." So, yes, I think it's fun to think about it that way with Jar Jar. There are these amazing videos you can watch on YouTube that make a really compelling case. But I think like people just love projecting onto these prequels meaning that really wasn't there, because a lot of like y'all probably have really interesting like headcanon that was just way cooler than what George Lucas was actually trying to do.
Well,
so that's what I think is going
Dylan,
on.
There is a behind-the-scenes footage, George Lucas saying Jar Jar is the key to all of this. So you tell me what that means.
I am telling you exactly what that means. It means that George Lucas wanted to sell a bunch of toys, and he thought if he made a really funny Jar Jar Binks character, he'd sell a lot of toys. That's exactly.
Yeah.
I love it.
You're the marketer, Charles. You know.
I do know.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, no,
we did Taylor Swift, Jar Jar. Yeah,
that's
Jim.
Fine.
Yeah, where do you want us?
That will stay in.
Absolutely, we go everywhere in this podcast. No problem. This is what we do. It's how we roll. All right, Dylan and Charles, it has been amazing having you guys with us here today. I'm just excellent. It's been good talk. We've got a few last things I want us to move through here, really posing specifically to both of you these questions.
Oh boy.
We may respond to, but mostly we just want to hear your takes on these things.
Yeah.
So, number one, why would you say to someone who enjoys fantasy fiction but hasn't touched Grimdark that they should definitely give it a try? Why would you say that?
Okay, I'll go first. I'd say, well, because some of the best books written in the past 10 years in the fantasy genre are grimdark. A whole lot of them. Like Abercrombie's one of our favorites. Game of Thrones is like pop culture phenomena, and those books are excellent. A lot of modern authors are diving into that, and that's just the trend of modern fantasy. So yeah, I think you at least owe it to yourself to try any one of those authors and see if it's for you. If it's not for you, then no point in continuing. But I think there's a reason that they're super popular and, super successful authors and super influential. So I would definitely recommend at least giving it a try just for those reasons alone.
I'd say keep reading your like epic, heroic, more upbeat fantasy until you start feeling fed up with seeing the same thing over and over again. And when you're starting to feel fed up, you'll feel super validated by the grimdark subgenre. If you never feel fed up and you continue to love the like heroic escapism elements, then you don't have to try grimdark. But once you start feeling kind of like bored, you're seeing the same things over and over again, a little bit like, what else can people do? How might we twist this? Give Grimdark a try.
That's a great answer. That's great.
So going a step further to kind of our next question here, it's a little bit for my benefit because I've read A Song of Ice and Fire, what there is at least. I refuse to read anything else that comes out.
He's jaded now. He is jaded.
A jaded literary sewer. Like
on that one, definitely. And we've mentioned a couple of authors throughout this that we've really thrown out, but are there any that you really throw out need to be mentioned or we haven't mentioned yet, or even book suggestions of these are like the top 3. If you're going to do Grimdark, start with this, do this. What needs to be added for me or for our listeners?
Yeah, so I would first say, did you like Game of Thrones before you were disenchanted by external factors?
Yeah.
Well, in that case, I would definitely, obviously, Joe Abercrombie a try, Mark Lawrence a try. Someone that I would recommend that may not fall so perfectly in here is Lev Grossman's The Magicians. That's just one where a bunch of people are depressed.
I have not.
Yeah. Well, that is one of my
favorite.
That's one of my favorite, fantasy series hard stop. And that's more like if you liked Harry Potter but wished all the kids were depressed, then you can read that, and it's excellent.
Harry Potter.
Yeah, it's a grim, dark Harry Potter, but there's not like all this gratuitous weird stuff. Certainly, there are shocking moments spread throughout, but it's more introspective about depression, and it's brilliant, and it's in a magical Harry Potter like world. So those 3 I would definitely recommend starting with, and I'm sure Dylan is going to chime in with a bunch of our other favorites.
Our listeners don't know that we're on Zoom, but we'll say it. Dylan went and got props, man. He's got books for us. All right, let's see.
I was just kind of stalling for him.
Yeah.
He's holding up some that I very strongly agree with, I can see. Right. So listen to him closely because he speaks for both of us.
Okay. Well, I'll start with Jim. I think you were the one who mentioned The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang briefly. Maybe that was on your TBR. Which I heard from
you guys first on our earlier podcast.
Great.
Yes.
We love Poppy War.
So, The Poppy War is by Rebecca Kuang. She's up for, I believe, a Hugo for Best Series, and she's younger than us. She's like this incredible modern voice, and she writes the Rin, the main character, extremely proactive, extremely morally gray in the ways that you expect from a grimdark character. It's very psychological, very character focused, but also brings the grimdark cynicism to big picture things like oppression and cultural appropriation. And she's getting her PhD at Yale right now. I don't want to mess up her degree, but I think it's I don't want to mess it up, but she's an expert in a lot of topics that she explores, and it's incredible, and got one of our favorite characters.
And that's like really recent, right?
Really
like
recent.
2016, I think.
Yeah, the last book came out in the past year. It came out in 2020.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Fantastic.
It's a trilogy. Yeah.
Yeah,
they just sold the movie rights too, so we're gonna get some kind of show or movie or something in the not too distant future. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
I have to read it before that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Highly recommend. It moves at a blazing fast pace. It's my favorite. I've been accused of hastiness before on several mediums, and it fits how I like stuff to move. It doesn't have a ton of time to process, so it might go too far for some people.
Yeah, world building people might have to adjust the pacing. I love Wheel of Time too, and I love the world building, but it's very different. Very different.
So the dialogue is super modern. The characters, So anyway, highly recommend that one. Okay. I'm grabbing a lot more modern stuff just because that's kind of where I tend to gravitate.
Oh, he's holding Broken Earth. I just finished reading Broken Earth.
I can't wait to get into it. Yeah.
That was something.
Tell Charles to check it out.
You should check it out. Now, I've told people the first book, you got to work through first book. There's some really dark stuff there. But make it through and keep going because it all has payoffs. It makes sense of why the first book happened once you get into 2 and 3.
That's exciting.
And that's the thing. We're talking grimdark here, so expect a lot of messed up off stuff. And it's N.K. Jemisin, the Broken Earth trilogy. And this one's already won 3 Hugo Awards this series, 3 consecutive years. So
the rights were also recently bought by Sony.
Nice.
There we go. I didn't know that, actually. That's awesome. Yes. Thanks for breaking that to us, Jim. Yeah. So that's an awesome one. And it's just, there's stuff I don't want to spoil anything, but there's stuff being done there that is so unique and just stuff I've never seen in the genre before. And there's second person point of view, which is really interesting from perspective. I'm in psychology when I'm not blabbing into a microphone. And it explores like the detachment and like stuff that comes from trauma and the depersonalization. It's so good. I'll let that one speak for itself a little bit more. My number one underrated grimdark recommendation that I like to give, especially for fans of Joe Abercrombie, is Ed McDonald's Blackwing. This is the first in a trilogy, and it's much more character focused, first person point of view. It is very fast paced. It's like, I have the book right now. It's like 300 some odd pages, which is, it might feel refreshing, even though it's grimdark. It might feel refreshing for some Wheel of Time fans looking for a break between book 10 and 11. And I think that, pick this up. It'll change the pace. It's got that Joe Abercrombie kind of humor, which not all grimdark has, that humor that kind of brings you back up and keeps you moving through it. The Blackwing totally does. Ed McDonald, super underrated book. And if you like character focused stuff.
Yeah, there was no humor in Broken Earth. No humor.
Not very, no, yeah. It's very, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just going to say, it made me think of another recommendation, and I'm wondering if I'm going to say this. I'm going to say Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn. I don't know if I'd call it grimdark, but it is violent and it has blood. And it could be a good litmus test for.
It's very dystopian.
It's dystopian. If you find that to be too much for you, then you might want to stop there. But it might be a good transitionary book.
It's gateway fantasy. And in a way, for fantasy readers, it can be gateway grimdark.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, that's well said. That's well said.
Want to hear something? So I just checked out that list I have up that Mark Lawrence did the rankings for to see, like, did Mistborn even make? Did Mark Lawrence think to include it?
Right.
But he did, which is interesting. And The Final Empire, which is the first book in the Mistborn series, got a 1.97 grimdark rating, and it's out of 5.
Okay, so
I see it as a good.
I'd give it a 2 out of 5 on a grimdark scale, maybe even less. So that's fair.
And Wheel of Time fans, you probably are familiar with Brandon Sanderson. If you haven't checked out his work that he's his work
tend
that
to be
he's
big fans since he can't save the day.
Yes. So if you want to read about heroes coming in and saving the day, much like Brandon Sanderson did for Wheel of Time, his books fantastic, and I think that is a good starting spot. Yeah.
Now, Dylan, you had one other one you were holding up before.
So for our comic fans, Monstrous is a series that I see as I think that it's interesting. Joe Abercrombie, if you ask him about, not that we have, but I've watched other people do it. If you ask him about the Grimdark label, he says, I don't really like that label, even though his Twitter handle is @LordGrimdark. And he says he's trying to kind of move away from just this like constant, like this label of like constant cynicism and no hope and no optimism and all nihilism. And I think he's doing that with his later work. And also I see this wave happening. Other people like John Gwynn, who does the Shaft of the Gods, which we read recently. And there's other folks kind of riding this wave that I think Monstrous is a comic series that has this very grimdark, brutal, gritty, cynical world, but with the kind of heroes who, in some way, not all of them, but so I would say there's one character that comes to mind who is like a hero who is able to resist and have hope. And there's other characters that are morally gray and all that stuff, but who do make the right choices when push comes to shove. And I think that the characters don't feel grim dark, but they're just stuck in such a dark world that they have to be that way. And so like that moral nuance just has to be there. So some like heroism is happening in the Monstrous series. But just you look at the art, and I'll hold some of it up, and on the Zoom call you'll see this looks pretty messed up and dark, right? But there are people trying to do their so that's by Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda. So highly recommend all those.
All right. Well, one last question. Oh boy. This is an easy one for you guys now. How should people look to connect with you? If they've loved meeting you on this episode and they want to talk with you more, what are the best ways to do that?
That's a great question there. So let's see. Twitter is probably the best place, over at the FTF podcast with the number 1 at the end. And then Instagram at the FTF podcast. Those are the 2 places where we are most active. We have our own personal Twitter accounts as well that we'll chime in on, get a little bit a little bit more off the rails, if you can believe that we would be capable of such a thing. That happens all the time on Twitter. So I recommend checking it out there.
What's your personal, Charles?
Oh, Charles_MC. Dylan, I'm sure you want to give yours.
Oh, if you insist, Charles. At Dylan R. Marsh.
Yes. And wherever you can listen to podcasts, if you want to hear the show, that's where we are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, we definitely recommend you guys go check them out because they're a good listen. Fun stuff. You'll agree with a lot of it. You might throw things at it once in a while too because you'll disagree, and that's part of the fun. You know, that's
what Twitter's for. You can throw things at our personal accounts now.
It's on the record.
Yes, because most things that people want to throw are probably at me, so you now don't have to bother Charles while you're doing it.
Yeah.
Well, Zach, if our listeners actually do want to contact us too, how would they do that? How would they get a hold of us?
Well, if they wanted to, just like with our friends over at Friends Talking Fantasy, we can also most active on Twitter, Fantasy for the Ages. But you also can reach out to us through our email, fantasyfortheages@gmail.com. Find all of our drink recipes on Instagram. Hop onto Facebook and see the dying platform that it is, and we might see what you put.
We jump in, we jump out.
Yeah, don't tell Charles. I haven't been updating ours so much.
I do forget once in a while. It's like, oh crap, I got to put 3 episodes up there now. I totally forgot Facebook.
Yeah, that's interesting. But if you guys definitely recommend checking you guys out. We enjoy watching you guys. I enjoy listening to your show. I think it's so wholesome to have a father and son duo. It's so much fun. And we are working our way through Wheel of Time slowly but surely, and I appreciate being able to use your episodes as reference of like, okay, what happened? Like, what do I need to take home? Like, what's going on?
That was an impressive buddy read decision to do Wheel of Time. I'm like, wow, good job. Well,
we started it, and now it's like postponed indefinitely, but we're working on it. We're going to get to that next book one day. We figured it's always going to be there. No rush. We're savoring it. There you
well
go.
Said, Charles. And luckily, everyone has Fantasy for the Ages to listen to for the deep dives on the Wheel of Time content. And
there we go.
Charles and I, we're not experts on it like you guys, but we're trying out there. That's what matters. We're giving it our all.
One other place that people can come and talk to us more is we're on Discord. I don't think we've seen a Discord for you guys. Are you on Discord?
We are not. We kind of put all our eggs in the Twitter basket, but we love using Discord. We pop, we'll pop around place to place. Dylan's really the social media driver of the show, so I'm speaking for him a little bit, but
I'll hop in your Discord.
There you go.
Tag.
It's not all Wheel of Time. We have a section for Wheel of Time, but we have stuff on all different fantasy. You'll find a place to chat about whatever you want on our Discord server for sure.
Yeah, tag me. Tell me how annoying it was I brought up Taylor Swift on your fantasy podcast.
I mean, if we're gonna get annoyed, I have seen her in concert, so.
You've been there.
Yes.
You've seen
amazing.
her.
Yeah, I saw her in concert.
I get the biggest shocks in here. A couple episodes ago, he told me a couple episodes ago that he's seen cocaine. Now today I hear he's seen Taylor Swift. Where is it going to stop?
I was like, Jim, I think you're going to need to make a Taylor Swift server on your Discord now that these
channel.
Yeah. Otherwise you're going to be in trouble.
It'll just be me asking Zach to tell me the whole, every track that she played, what his personal experience of each one was. So, hop in, see that
what conversation. Did we just open? Oh, no.
Wow.
All right. Well, again, this has been fun, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your wealth of wisdom on this, and just being able to kick the topic around with us. It's been a blast. Keep up the great work on your podcast. and I'm going to keep listening. Good stuff.
Oh,
He's listened to. I listen
I
more.
listen to bits and pieces. I have not gotten through the however many you've been.
Too many.
We have too many.
Whatever the most recent one is, just listen to that, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, it's like that's a lot of pressure to catch all the way up, Jim. And those, I really felt bad you were listening to the early episodes because
Everyone says that
they're not good.
Episode 4 for us, we think we're gonna have a T-shirt eventually that says "I survived episode 4."
Oh gosh,
That's
yeah.
how we feel. Isn't that so interesting? But not about you. When I listened to your early episodes, I was like, they're already doing it. They sound great. They're doing it. And when I listened to our early episodes, I'm like, why is my mouth like this? Why do I keep making mouth sounds? Like,
yeah, I did you a little dirty in the edit. Those early days.
All podcasters are their own harshest critics, though.
Yeah,
That's true.
yeah.
Because I don't remember you guys sounding bad at all. I just enjoyed it from the get-go.
Well, you guys sound great.
yes.
Well, thank you. All right, we've done all this love for each other. Now we should probably officially end the episode.
Before we stab each other in the back in true Grimdark fashion.
There we go.
Well, you guys have a sword right behind you, needle over there. It'd be easy to stab you in the back. You gotta watch out. I have to keep an eye on you behind.
We have more weapons too.
Oh gosh.
Watch out, Jim. Zach's back there with needle. Okay, sorry, I'll let you
I
enter
was
your
just running
episode.
just in case.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for listening. It's been fun, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you.